And thank you so much for choosing Morning Live. Now, Corruption Watch has released a new report called Corruption in Uniform: When Cops Become Criminals. And this report looks at the levels of corruption in the South African Police Service. And according to a non-profit organization, there's been an alarming and disturbing increase in females being extorted either for money or for sexual favors, also known as sextortion. Now, the report also points out that the leading categories of police corruption around the country are bribery and the abuse of power, but also the dereliction of duty in terms of non-performance ranks quite highly. Melusi Ncala, who is a researcher at Corruption Watch and the project manager of this report, joins us now to talk more about it. Melusi, good to see you again.
Good morning. And good morning to the viewers.
Let's just start by taking a look at your research methodology and how you got to conduct this particular research for the report.
So how Corruption Watch operates is that we always encourage members of the public to tell us about their incidents of corruption. So whenever they encounter or are exposed to corruption, then we always ask them to call in or to send us a message, or sometimes they walk into our offices. So what we then do, we take in this data, collate it, classify it accordingly, and then apart from several other projects that we embark on, we also produce reports such as this one. In a report such as this one, it's a data analysis, but this time around we just made it very easy for people to engage with. So we're analyzing the accounts of 1,440 people who have complained about corruption in the police.
And over what sort of time is this? What time period are we talking about?
So we're looking from 2012 until the end of 2018.
So let's just go into a little more detail about what these 1,440 people have said and how you have then collated that data as Corruption Watch.
So what the people are saying, there are mainly three categories of, three forms of corruption that people highlight, and that is bribery, which is at about 33%, abuse of power, which is a category that we've designated for the police for several reasons, but anyway, that comes in at 23%, and then dereliction of duty is at 18%. And then, of course, this is spread out across the country. Gauteng, which is at 52%, and then KZN 11%. Western Cape also features there in the top three.
Which is very interesting because talking about a bribery, for instance, and I think many people can attest to that even watching the show right now. And in this particular issue, the public is as much at fault here because they offer the bribes. So can you just elaborate on that and what the respondents were actually pointing out in this regard as problematic?
Yeah, I mean, it's always easy for us to want to point the finger at someone else, but then we don't understand what our role is, especially if corruption becomes one of those, dare I say, cultural thing in our society. So, you know, bribery, for example, or how these forms of corruption should be looked at, and especially this data, is quite holistically because they all speak to each other. So, I mean, the report also goes on to talk about detectives, it goes on to speak about warrant officers, station commanders. And what we have learned, at least for me, what stood out for me is in one of the cases that I studied, was an account of a woman who was victimized and abused, and she wanted to open up a case. The officer who was supposed to assist her was basically grilling her, not believing her account. It went as far as for him to say that he wants to strip search her, even though she said, then if I have to consent to a strip search, can you please get me a female officer? He insisted that he's in charge, he's the person authority, and this was all because he wanted sexual favors from her.
And of course, the report highlights that the increase in sextortion, and perhaps just a further elaboration in terms of the meaning of that. And when you talk about an increase, also give us some inkling of how it has increased.
So sextortion is, it's basically extortion, where police officers, in this particular instance, will seek to solicit sexual favors from complainants, people who go to a police station, specifically women, and want to open cases. So that's an exchange where usually it would be money. This time around it's sexual favors. Most of the reports that speak to this fact are under the bribery factor, the 33%. The report doesn't really stipulate as to how much, but it is in the, about 5 to 10% of the reports that are found in this category.
But also the report highlights that when you look at all of these crimes, the bribery, the sextortion and whatever it may be, the report also says that these officers are aided by their colleagues. So it's very difficult to actually find justice in the end.
Yeah, you know, it's a patronage system because, you know, for you to be able to go about your affairs, you need the assistance of your colleagues. And it's not necessarily fellow officers, but also just officials. Your clerks at a police station, they would assist in making sure that a docket disappears somehow, and then a case gets thrown out of court. Also, you know, when a complaint is made about a drug dealer, for instance, usually it's not just one person investigating that, it's a team that is investigating that kind of offense. And so what eventually happens is that they end up colluding with these suspects, and it jeopardizes everything.
But there are checks and balances in the system. IPID comes to mind, the Independent Directorate for Investigative Policing there. And do you find that the public takes the time to actually report these incidents to IPID so that they can investigate the police?
IPID receives many accounts, or many reports rather, where members of the public who are dissatisfied with the service that they get from police stations. Hence, we have a category called dereliction of duty, which is 18%. So we will refer people to IPID, and we often have, but people come to Corruption Watch because they've lost hope, they've cried, they've shouted, and no one has listened. And so, though there are checks and balances in place, you know, there are situations where we will hear that they are overburdened, there are not enough resources to actually deal with some of these complaints.
So did you try to ascertain how people feel in terms of IPID and their effectiveness, their efficacy in dealing with complaints that land on their table?
No, this report does not deal with, we didn't question people as to whether are you happy with the police or not. That was not the intention. The intention was simply just to understand how they experience corruption. The people would volunteer information and say, I'm a victim of corruption, or I have witnessed corruption happening in this particular instance.
Now, there's always been this trust deficit between the police and communities that they serve. Does the report highlight this, and how these categories that you've highlighted, how does that impact on that trust deficit?
It's not done in a sense to say that there's a percentage put to it, but it's implicit when you read the various accounts and understand the report, what it says. So, I mean, it's a case of historically the institution of police has always had a binary way of operating, you know, and that's what the feel is when you read this report, because people seem to suggest by what they talk about that it's about the haves and the have-nots. For those who do not have anything, they feel that they're disempowered. You know, they don't have the jojo to give to a police, so therefore they will suffer the consequences.
So looking at the report and what it has highlighted, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to try and assist IPID to get them to perhaps look into some of these claims, or how do you intend taking this forward?
So it's a multi-pronged approach that we have as Corruption Watch. So for the first time in a report of this nature, research report, we have decided to release public education material, even though the purpose for this actually is to make people aware of their rights and also what to do when they find themselves confronted by a corrupt officer. We are in continuous dialogue with the anti-corruption unit in the police, and we have had engagements with IPED, bringing them some of these cases, letting them know that this is the experiences of people and what could they perhaps do to intervene. So this is part of the things that we're doing. And recently, we also won the Google Impact Challenge. So in this project called Know Your Police Station, what we are seeking to do is to canvass police stations across the country to assess what resources are available at various police stations, who is in charge, so that we can communicate this data to people in communities, so that people in these communities can know what's in their police station, but more importantly, hold those in authority to account so that we can have more transparent police stations.
Well, Melusi Ncala, thanks so much for speaking to us. And Melusi is from Corruption Watch and discussing their latest research report, Corruption in Uniform. And it speaks to what is happening in our police services and dereliction of duty, bribery, among some of the issues highlighted there once again.